I'd love to give some context for people for who you are in case they haven't heard of you. And I like to let you do that. And the question I ask is, when people ask you what you do, how do you answer them?
Oh, good question. I do me.
Okay.
Right? I think that's been a big lesson in my life, is learning how to listen to my internal voice instead of the external expectations of society. So by doing me, I am adventuresome. So I'm climbing mountains. I'm getting outside as often as possible. I am mothering 7 children. And then I run a business that has offices in Michigan for financial advising services.
Okay. So offices in Michigan, but you don't live in Michigan. Where are you at?
Yep. So I'm located in Park City, Utah. I used to live in Michigan, but when the business got up and running to a point where I could continue to hire myself out of those roles, I realized that I could do my job remotely. And so I looked to a location that had 4 seasons and lots of sunshine.
Yeah, that was probably important coming from West Michigan.
Yes.
My first question is, first of all, 7 kids is a lot. And then you mentioned climbing mountains, and then you run and own a business remotely. Like, how could you possibly have enough time? And do you feel like you have enough time to do all those things?
I do. I am very blessed with having amazing people in my life. And when you have a village filled of just top-notch individuals that are always doing their best, it really is me just, hey, how's it going? How are you? Like, I'm empowering. I'm in such a position to be able to empower instead of micromanage, that if I don't talk to the business people for a while, they're fine. If I do mountains for a little bit, I have such a strong foundation in my training that it's fine. And the kids are my priority.
Yeah. How old are you? What's the range?
Yeah. So my oldest is 15. He is a sophomore in high school. They started this week already out here.
Wow.
Then my youngest are in 4th grade. They're twin daughters.
Okay. Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. So
we're tight. So we go 10th
yeah.
grade, 9th grade, 8th grade, 7th grade. We skip 6th grade. Then we have 5th grade and then 2 4th graders.
Man, so not even that long. Well, I'll go like 10 years ago, you were really in the parenting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know though. Like, I would say it's funny, as your children age, it's a different type of parenting, right? And so when they were younger, when you said no, it meant no. Now, when I say no, it needs like a 30-minute rationalization of why it's no, what we have to think about, the different aspects of it. And it's a lot more heavy lifting than what I expected as they've gotten older.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I've heard it said, like, as they get older, they need less of your attention, like, constantly. But when they do need your attention, they really need like full 100% you present versus, kind of 50% you while you're doing something else.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So being able to empower people, talking about your business, do you feel like you also do that with your kids in your home and your family as well? So that, because 7 kids, like, that is a full-time job by itself, and they need, like we were just saying, lots of attention and care. But have you kind of taken that same approach in the home?
I have. They're so unique. Like, I have 7 entirely different humans. People ask me, what's your favorite? I'm like, it depends on what mood I'm in. I have every option available right now at home. So it rotates all the time. But what happens is you get blessed with this human, and you realize, like, the minute they're handed to you from the doctor, you realize that this is like, life is truly a miracle. And they came here with some sort of purpose. So my job is to give them like a safe space to explore who they are. And so when you look at it every day and you think of your home as a greenhouse per se, is the soil good for them? Is the lighting good for them? Like, you start thinking of, like, what am I doing that's giving them the best environment to be their best selves? And that's what I focus on. And because I focus on that, like, root thing, I feel like the parenting piece has gotten a lot easier.
Wow. I've been thinking about this a little bit, like, with my own kids, like, what's my job description? Like, I'm wired that way. Just, okay, what are my responsibilities? What are the requirements of me. And then like, cause my kids are younger, it's not as tangible, like what they're growing towards, And so I'm like, how do I get my mind to not disconnect those two things and have that really intentional approach? Like it sounds easy, but then when I actually go live my life, it's really hard and so disconnected.
Yeah.
Because like the three.
I'll run through, like when I'm picking him up from school, I'll run through, okay, greenhouse, greenhouse, greenhouse. I just have to keep that metaphor in my mind because then it just reminds me, okay, we're in this season or we're in this piece and that's okay. And it helps me not overparent, which is an easier thing to do than what people seem to claim.
Right. Well, it's such a good analogy. I'm sure I'll hold that in my mind as well. Like it's that nurturing, stewarding, like, come on, little plant.
Like, I love you, grow,
produce
water.
Right. Yeah. And it with the intention that it would produce fruit, that it would do what it was supposed to do, which is, the long-term plan. So 7 kids. Talk about the mountain part, because I think there's not enough context there. Like you climb mountains, but you do more than climb mountains.
Yeah. So, well, this will be a little long-winded, so cut me off to keep the conversation. But I got into a car accident in 2018. I was hit by a semi, rolled 3 times, ended up in the median. The police came. By miracles from above, I walked away unscathed.
Wow.
I literally got a phone call from the police a couple of weeks later saying, we rebuilt this accident more than 50 times, and we have yet to be able to build a scenario where you live.
Really?
Right. I mean, it was.
They called you to tell you that.
They called me to tell me that because, so like in our area, everybody knows everybody, right? And so like somebody knew, and they're like, hey, because it's an area that had gotten a lot of accidents. So they've been trying to analyze it to figure out what to do to make the area safer and blah, 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 blah. And so they had called, and they had like someone had turned in some stuff that they found on the side of the road that came out of my car. And so there's a couple of purposes to the phone call, but you have that experience and you go home, and I mean, it's so cliche, but nothing's the same. Like it's a line in the sand. There is pre-accident, there's post-accident, and you just don't go back. And I just remember coming home and, kids bicker. And instead of being like exhausted because my kids are fighting, all of a sudden I'm in this space of, isn't it amazing that they each have this opinion and they're so like committed to this opinion, and they're trying to convince the other to share their same opinion. And like, you just look at it as like, wow, this is so cool that humans can be so unique. Right.
Yeah.
And it just shifts you on. I mean, I remember getting a call from the principal's office, and I'm like, I'm alive to receive a call from the principal's office. What would you like to talk about? I'm totally okay with this right now. And I mean, I wish I could say that feeling lasts forever.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, it doesn't, but you can tap into it again because you felt it before, and then you kind of remember the narrative around it. But, and then a couple of weeks after that, I had a friend die in a fluke accident running. Like slipped, it was a little wet, slipped, hit her head, and was passed away instantly on a trail that you would roll a stroller.
Really?
Right? Wow. Yeah. So it was just this bizarre sequence of events that really made me like go internal and say, why am I here? Like, why was I saved? Like, what is, I'm here for a purpose. What is that? Right. And I mean, that was all of 2019. And then, COVID happens right in the beginning of 2020. I got lucky. The kids and I went out to Hawaii because they didn't get it as fast as we did. And then we ended up staying in Hawaii during COVID.
Wow.
We rented this house on the beach, and it was just nice because all of that crazy wasn't in their home, right? It was in another environment. So their home was still kind of a safe space. We didn't have to stay there in quarantine or whatever. Yeah. And while we were doing homeschooling, like the rest of the world, my son was complaining about his math homework. And I'm like, buddy, you got this. We do hard things. Like, don't worry about it. And at this time, I turned 40 in 2020 to age me, but I was planning on climbing a mountain called Ama Dablam in Nepal. Again, it's one of those things, you get into an accident and you realize life is limited. So what can I do while I'm young and healthy? and I've always wanted to climb like a big mountain. And a friend of mine said, that was a big mountaineer, said, go climb this one. It's the prettiest. It's amazing. It's blah, blah, blah. And it's the one that Paramount Pictures uses as their backdrop.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So that's Amma. And so I'm like training kind of for that, because the trip keeps getting postponed because of COVID, but I'm going to be ready when it's time to go. Well, that makes no sense to my son, right? He's like, well, if we do hard things, why aren't you climbing Mount Everest? Right? Because that's a mountain to him,
right.
you know,
Sure.
which is fair. And I said to him, I said, you know what? You do your math. And when you're done doing your math, let's research Mount Everest. So we started researching Mount Everest and looking into it. And I called this guy that's kind of like a mountaineer expert. And he said, you're totally can do it. You should look at it. And in one of the coaching calls, he said, buy this book. So I bought a book called like the Uphill Athlete or something. And in the front of that book, there was a little section about a girl who had gotten a Guinness World Record for doing something fantastic in the Alps. And half joking, I called the coach, went on our next call, and I said, Alan, I could have done that. Like, I can suffer. And we buy those Guinness World Record books every year because it inspires my kids to read. They love to know like how many hot dogs someone ate or how many pies happened or whatever.
Who the tallest person is. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I was in the Guinness World Record, like I would be cool. And that'd be awesome. And he kind of like, we chuckled it off and he's like, we'll find you something. Don't you worry. We'll find you something. And, so I'm, COVID gets less severe. I go climb this Ama de Blanc mountain. I'm signed up to climb Everest. And in between that, he said, hey, you know what? I got an idea. Because I think you should climb the 7-second summits, which are the second highest point on each continent instead of the highest. And the reason why is because you love to travel. You have 7 children and you are going to be respected amongst your peers, which has always been important for you. The public might not know what it is as much, but I know that you're more for the peer respect than the public respect. And I said, yeah, I go, we should look at that. So I'm like, let's try it. So I went to Chile and climbed a mountain there. That was the easiest one. So I figured I'd start with the easiest.
Yeah. Knock it out.
And this is what happens when you start pursuing goals and you start making them public, is people come out of the woodwork to help, right? They're excited. They hear what you're doing. They're like, hey, so I have this friend, which is like so random, or a friend of a friend who was involved in a charity in Africa, and they needed to deliver an ambulance. And they said, hey, we saw that you need to climb a mountain in Kenya. This is where we need to deliver this ambulance. If you go over there in the next few months, would you mind doing that for us so that we don't have to send another person? Yes, of course I would do this thing. And so then I ended up climbing Mount Kenya next and helped with that charity project. And then I went to Everest, and actually living in Park City is fantastic for mountaineering because we have really good training grounds just outside of the mountain.
Right.
And then the community is big outdoors. So we did this huge campaign at the kids' school about what's your Everest goal. And all the kids put like on the wall what their goal was. And I went in and talked to them about like setting time aside and how you achieve goals. And I did that just because it was going to be the longest I'd been away from home. And I went into the school and I said, hey, I'm worried about my kids. I just wanted to let everybody know so they're a little more conscientious of what's happening at home. And then the school's like, let's do this to help them. And so we did this whole thing, and I could call the kids from base camp, and we did Zoom calls, and they could ask questions.
Wow.
It was just magic. And then, just kept climbing. And that's kind of how that whole thing's come together.
So take me, like your 4th grade son says this to you.
Yep.
This was, I don't know, was it 3 years ago? 2019?
It was 2020. It
was 2020.
2020.
During COVID, you said. Yeah, that's right.
COVID, yeah.
So not that long ago, but now he's a 6th grader. He's watched. Does he feel like he was a catalyst for this in any way? I mean, you've told the story, I'm sure, a few times. Yeah. And have you seen that do anything in him? Like, wow, I actually like helped bring this about.
Oh, they think like it's really cute. So we're filming a documentary about chasing goals and the story and all that. And so the kids have been interviewed and a part of that. And the film people are they said it's so fun because I have twin daughters, and they're like, well, my mom climbed Mount Everest and she said, I can climb Mount Everest too. And so someday I'm going to climb Mount Everest. Right. And so it's fun because I'm doing a tangible goal that they can kind of see. The community got involved. And when they don't want to do things, they're seeing, like, I'm having conversations of, guess what? I don't want to go work out today either. Or I don't want to eat healthy today. Or I don't want to do these things, but that's the cost of doing big. And it just gives them, we have like parallel lives at some level right now, right? With what they don't want to do and what they're committed to and what I don't want to do and I'm committed to. And it's been a blast.
Yeah. Yeah. You've kind of let them in on the journey, and it's not just like mom's thing. Like they're a part of it. Yeah. Wow. So, you say this thing like, okay, well, I'm going to go do this goal. A lot of people set out to do a hard thing or a goal like that. Maybe not as big of a goal, but something that seems big to them, but they don't have the staying power. Like you hear all the stats. Oh, I've set this goal for January for this year. And what is it? Like 15% of people finish their New Year's resolutions. Like, what about you or your circumstances and situation has let you see it through?
I credit a few things. One, when you make your goals public, all of a sudden you're not letting yourself down knowing you don't reach them. You're letting everybody else that's been a part of that journey. Right. So that's been a big piece of it. And then also I feel a responsibility now to carry it through and make them happen, because every single experience has been so unique and so eye-opening, because it's not even about the mountain anymore, right? It's about, for example, I just got back from K2, which it was a huge success, which I'm so grateful for, because
congratulations.
Thank you. I went to K2 in 2021 and did not summit, and had a real rough time there. So going back this year was a little overwhelming, but to make me go back, right? To make it exciting again. And for me to want to go back, I actually ended up sponsoring a couple Pakistani climbers, because the mountains in Pakistan, and unfortunately they don't have the money to be able to buy the oxygen or the gear to be able to climb their own mountain. But if they climb that mountain, they're able to have a guiding job for life, right? I mean, it's a
cool
changer for them. So I knew that for me to go back, I had to have it be about somebody else, not just me, because I was just dreading going. And so then when you make your goal, or you allow space for different things to show up, or different ways to serve, or different ways to make it bigger than you, it makes it fun. It makes it exciting. It makes you want to do it. And that's been the trick.
Yeah. No, those are really good life hacks. Like, bring other people, because you get that accountability kind of built in when you incorporate other people, but then the service part just makes it matter. Because sometimes, you're chasing this going like, why does this matter? When it's just like so self-focused, but when it's for other people, like that's really good. Like I'm gonna take a lot of notes.
Here's another piece of that. So, I'm a female climber, and I get a ton of static of like, oh, you're a mom, why you're gone for 4 weeks at a climb or whatever. I'm like, okay, one, there's 2 climbs that are 4 weeks long. The rest of them are a week or so long, right?
Yeah.
And so let's not focus on that. But what happens is so when you go to Pakistan, they're getting some news of the United States, right? But they, like, a lot of people have never met somebody from the United States, right? Or met somebody that maybe looks like me, that's, they kind of have a stereotype of what a climber is or whatever else like that. So then when you go over there and you start talking, or you start communicating, you start connecting with those local people, it gives them a whole new perspective of what's possible, how it is versus what TV shows. And it really just connects 2 entirely different cultures from a non-social media standpoint. And I think that's going to be so important as we get more globalized as economies, to really bring the people component to those places. And this climbing has definitely opened doors for that. And I'm so grateful.
Yeah, no, that's really, like, what's been something in your interactions with the Pakistani people, for example, that you've been able to give them some understanding, but what have you taken from them and their culture that maybe was a preconceived notion that changed or just totally surprised you?
Yeah. So I think we have this tendency, or I have this tendency, I shouldn't put a we. I have this tendency to go somewhere and think like, I know the best way to do everything, right? I've got it figured out. And then you go over there and their culture is entirely like women are not allowed in the market. Women are not allowed to buy stuff at the stores. Like it, depending on what part of Pakistan you go to, but it's very much women are property versus women being equals. And so that was just a really challenging component to be with. But what it really opened my eyes to is that for any change to happen here, I have to meet them where they are. I can't just walk into the market and like buy stuff and blah, 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 because that's what's okay in the United States. Like I need to respect the rules of their culture. And then when I'm hiking in or I'm doing the things, then I'm building, like I'm making little teeny tiny question marks in their head. Oh, this person's strong enough to hike, or this, like, it doesn't have to be this big full on like full court press. It's sometimes like the subtle little things that you can do that really just start pecking away at their thought processes and makes more possible versus them saying, back up, get away. Yeah.
There's so many analogies I can think of with the like chipping away and the ways to like be influential in people's lives, because it's just like not easy to build trust. Like it takes time, and that's where you have the opportunities to like actually have real conversations that mean something for people or have any influence in their life in any way. And it's just a slow game. So okay, your story may have been the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you the question anyways, because it's the primary question for the podcast. But it's what is the hardest thing in your life you wouldn't take back?
There's so many little key things in your life that I can go back on, but when it's controversial, but I had fertility assistance and I had embryos on ice, and I lived in Michigan at the time. And so in Michigan, you have 3 choices with those embryos. You can use them, you can donate them, or you can destroy them, and they give them to you to destroy. And I remember sitting in the clinic and they said, I bet you 3 or 4 children could maybe come from this, but there's 4 at the max. 3 would be really good. 2, you should be really happy because they rank them or whatever. And for me, I could not destroy them because I just felt like karma would come back. So that was not an option. And then I felt like if I donated them my whole life, I'd be like, are you my kid? Are you my kid? I'm like, I didn't want to do that. And so I had 14 embryos, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I can do 3 to 4 kids for sure. I can do that. And you have 4 children and you still have embryos on ice. And I remember wanting to go back on that decision, right? I'm like, what is this? Like, I have to payroll these humans, right? Like, this is a huge commitment. And I'm like, and I sat with myself and I said, you know what? I have to keep to my commitment. I have to say, I'm giving them a chance. Whatever's going to happen is supposed to happen. And I have to have that faith to believe it's for the better. And I will tell you, like, at first 7 kids, like my oldest was 6 years and 2 months when the twins came, because they came early. And I had 7 kids in like 6.5 years, basically. And I just remember thinking like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. But I'm so glad that I made the decision and stuck with my decision, because now I trust myself in every environment. I know that I'm going to follow through. I know when times get hard that I'm going to still do the thing that I said that I'm going to do. And that has been a thread that has given me confidence at anything that's come my way. And I didn't have the wherewithal, the knowledge. So I think that whole experience just opened my eyes to how important it is to build trust in yourself, so that you have that confidence that whatever comes your way, that you can count on yourself and you can achieve great things. Yeah. So talk about what it means to be able to trust yourself in those, because it's like one thing to say it when you're not in it. It's like, I trust myself. I'm going to have the resolve or the resiliency. But then when you get in it, push comes to shove, you're faced with a hard decision that has a cost to it. Like,
what's the process that you go through in your mind? Like, are you bringing back when you were strong before? Or I'd just be curious if you could like lift the curtain a little bit on that internal process.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. When I was in Pakistan in 2021, I went with a company from Pakistan, which I was like at first trying to climb these mountains and make sure that I benefit the country in which I was climbing in, and kind of like thought everything was operated at the same level of safety. And I learned from that experience that different people have different definitions of what safety means. Yeah, right. And so I had promised my kids that I was coming home. I'm like, I'm going to do these big mountains, but I'm going to come home. And I made that commitment to them. And when I was in Pakistan, we had lost a team member to an avalanche. Another team member lost a hand to frostbite. And we had like a few other tragedies on the team. And it is so hard for me to quit something or to turn around. And I had to sit with myself and say, you know what? I don't know if I can keep my promise of coming home if I continue based on all these things that have happened. And so the expedition was done. Other people, some I did not, but I kept my promise to my children, and I turned around and I failed, right? Like I failed in front of everybody. Everybody who was following watched it. Now, of course, like they could see the story, and I got a ton of congratulations, so glad you turned around, like we understand why you made the decision, blah 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 blah. But it doesn't mean it's easy to communicate that decision, right? Like I'm the person that gets stuff done, so I had to let go of that story of being the person that gets stuff done and make sure that I was in a position that I could follow through with my promise to my children. And so then when I went back there this year, I was with a different company. We were very safe, we had a successful summit, and I'm still alive without any risk.
Yeah. So talk about that identity piece a little bit, like having to let go of who you've been and how you've accomplished so much, right? Like being a person who gets stuff done gets you places. And I'm sure led to like having a successful business, being able to have 7 kids who are healthy and good, and then climbing mountains. But like, do you mourn that loss a little bit? Are you now finding a new identity? Like, how did that
so, like
kind of work
that,
itself out?
so I make it very situational, right? So in this situation, the best way to move forward is to come home and to not get this one thing done. And so then when I actually came home from Pakistan and I was at the house, like I landed in LA, and then I was supposed to fly to Salt Lake City. And when I landed in LA, like my family wasn't expecting me home for a little bit yet. So I called the nanny. I said, you know what? I just had a whole bunch of stuff happen. I'm going to take 2 days here and journal and call my therapist and just work through some of this narrative so that I can get to a spot where I'm not the victim in this story. And so I took the time, I wrote through things and really put myself into a position of how this happened for me instead of how this happened to me. And then I came home, and that's when I was like, you know what? I wasn't supposed to summit, because not everybody hits their goal the first time. And so this is a lesson to others that even if you don't hit it the first time, you can still go back. You still have stuff you learned. There's still value in the journey, right? And then it allowed me to come back and allowed me to sponsor people to be able to climb. Right. And so if that didn't happen, then these other things wouldn't have happened. And so it just really allowed me to navigate the narrative and put it myself back into an empowering position, even in the spite of failure.
Right. And I'm similar in my mindset. Like I don't like to fail at things, or I'll put it in air quotes, because you can kind of define success in a lot of ways. And, in this regard, you were successful at keeping your word with your kids. Right. And,
Right.
It felt like failure because you didn't climb the mountain. And it's almost as important to learn the skill of like knowing when to say no and when to quit things and let things go, to be able to like focus your efforts on the right things. And in this regard, it sounds like that had to be like in the moment. And you don't always, like, you didn't have the luxury of 2 days beforehand to make this. And you had to like decide pretty quick, I'm guessing, on the mountain. What are you
I
gonna
was like,
do?
this isn't safe. This is not like, this something's off. And if
Yeah.
something's off and I'm in it, like prior to this year, K2 is known for 25% of the people that summit die.
Yeah.
And so I'm already on a really risky mountain. I'm already on, like, you're hearing all these quotes and all these stories. And I just said, if this doesn't feel 100% right, I can't go forward. That would be doing a disservice to what feels right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it before, but as a parent, I would commend you for making a really hard decision. I can't imagine how difficult that was, because there's a lot invested in that trip.
Oh,
But man, you got to go back and do it, which is probably so sweet.
yeah.
Can you talk? I'm the 2 days that you just stayed in LA before going back to your family, like you'd already been gone for a while. I can't imagine that was an easy decision either, because I'm sure you wanted to see your kids, they wanted to see you. And I would imagine there's some part of you that's like, they need me. Like, I need to be around them and a part of their life. And am I like hurting them by staying away longer when I could be there? Like, talk about that choice, because it sounds like it was a really healthy choice. But as a parent, that's not an easy choice to make. And
it's not.
Every parent feels that.
Yeah, no, for me, they knew how dangerous that mountain was when I was going there, right? And they knew that a teammate died on my team. They had heard, like, they're hearing all of this stuff. So I'm like, I should go home so they know, like, so they can see me and it's tangible and they know everything's good. But I knew if I went home, if I didn't show them the confidence in what I was doing or feeling or deciding, they would sense that. Like, kids know.
Yeah.
And so as a parent, I knew that I had to be strong and convicted and owning my decision, so that when they had questions or they had needs that they were asking, I could be that stable, solid ground for them instead of being wobbly too.
Yeah.
And so it was really a decision of, how can I show up the best for others? I need to first show up the best for me. And I'm not there. Like, I just buried, like, I was supposed to climb a mountain and I just buried a human, and I watched someone with frostbite wait 3 days for a helicopter to rescue them. And like, there was so much that happened so fast that I was like, okay, I have to have conversations about these things and not instill fear. And I just wasn't there when I got off that airplane. It was like, once I got onto US soil, it was almost like I could take a deep breath. I'm like, okay, I'm in safe territory.
Yeah.
Like, right. And so when I was in safe territory, all of a sudden and when you feel safe, that's when emotions can flow. And that's kind of like the first time I really was processing everything that just happened. And I was like, I know that 2 more days in the scheme of life is going to mean nothing. But if I come home and I am not strong in my story, that is going to penetrate through everything I do going forward.
You sound like you have a gift of a long-term perspective that is hard to come, like, not everybody has the ability to hold a long-term view as they're in the short term in the present. Is that true of you? Would you say that's true?
Yeah, no, I definitely play the long game. Right. But I was like, I'll blame that on being in financial services when I got out of college, right? You learn, like, the time value of money. You learn, like, this is the long-term deal, and raising children and setting an example and being inspiring is a long-term game.
Yeah, it definitely is. So talking about being inspiring, for people who are in the middle of their own hard season, and maybe they can relate to the season that you're in, they've got a hard decision that they need to make, and they need to stick with their guns and follow through on what they said, or maybe they're trying to pursue a really hard goal, or maybe it's something totally different, but they're asking you for advice. They're like, how do I get through this? How do I stick with my convictions? Like, what words of advice do you have for people in a hard season?
You know, I really think the closer we get to our heart and out of our head, and the closer we get to our why, which I think we talked about earlier, is it takes a number of whys to get to that, like, core piece of it. If you lead from purpose, then you know the decision to make. It's not going to be easy. It's never easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't even be inspired to do it, right? I mean, the reality is, like, even when you play video games, if you have the cheat codes, it's not fun. Now it's done.
Right.
Right. Like we live, like people always ask about the mountain. I'm like, you get to the top of the mountain, but if it was about the mountaintop, we would just take helicopters up there, snap some photos and go to the next mountaintop. I mean, that's the reality of it all.
Totally.
It's not about the mountaintop. It's about like being up at that top and realizing like all the times you could have said no and you didn't. Right. Like we want the struggle. We want the story. We want the narrative of like we overcame and we became. And so anytime that you're in these like hard choices or decisions or like these noises that you hear, at least for me, I have to go in, reconnect to me, and then know that that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the person who's in a hard season and they feel like they haven't understood their why or their purpose, what would you say to them? They're like, okay, yeah, I want to get to the why of this, or I want to use my why to get through this, but I don't know what it is. Like, what would you say?
Yeah. Like, I think it's good to ask people that care about you, right? Like, hey, I'm in this hard season. I'm evaluating things. You being outside of me, what do you notice? Right? Where do I light up? Yeah. Where do you see that I add value? What do I bring to your life? And I think a lot of times other people can remind us of who we are. Yeah. If we allow that to happen.
I love that question. What do I bring to your life? Like, it takes you outside of yourself too in the hard, because I think so many times in a hard season, our eyes, like we get really focused on ourselves and internalized. And if we could get outside of ourselves and think about the value that we're adding to someone's life, like that just gives life regardless of the season. Exactly. And to hear it from somebody that you care about even more so. Like,
and I think it's really important to say, like, I'm in this hard season, so that person knows how it puts them in a framework to help. Right. Yeah. A lot of times I think we don't always set ourselves up for success, and we'll say like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? And if you're already sensitive or hurt or having a hard time, if they know that, they can package that for you to receive it in a more loving way than maybe just like a nonchalant interaction.
Right. Yeah. And that takes some vulnerability. Like sometimes we don't want people to know how hard the season is that we're in or where our mind is going. But I would hope, it sounds like you need to have that person where you can fully express that to them as a safe place. Kind of like the US was a safe place for you to finally process stuff. Like you need to have those people. It sounded like you had a couple in that moment too, that you talked to and processed with. Because I don't know if you can fully do it on your own.
Yeah, I don't think we're designed to, actually. I think we're a species that connects. And anytime that we disconnect, we feel isolated, alone, overwhelmed, like a whole bunch of things that once we learn that connecting is in the vulnerability, right? That we become our best selves.
Yeah. Yeah. I read a book a couple of years back. I think it was called The Social Connection, but it was basically the science of social behaviors that we have and who we are as people being social. And they basically argued that Maslow's hierarchy was wrong. And, that we start out with these base needs of physical, food, shelter, water, that if those aren't met, nothing else matters. But they said, no, actually social connection is below that. Because if you think about when you're born, like you have to have a connection to a human or you die. And so like, we're just so wired to need each other. And it was just that was a really powerful book because it was all this brain science about relationships and society and people. And they talked about, like they did a study on your brain, the effect of somebody like betraying you or some kind of emotional hurt, social relationship hurt had this, like an aspirin would have the same impact that it would like for physical pain.
Right.
Like, which blew my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. It's like emotional pain can be more bigger than like a broken arm.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are 100% social people. I want to go back to, this is totally like leaving that behind because I don't want to forget my question, but I wanted to ask you, because you talked about it's about the journey. Like it's not about the mountaintop so much. It's about the journey. Like, can you think of a couple like pivotal moments of the journey in the last couple of years that you draw on when because you're still on the journey?
I am. I have 2 mountains still ahead of me.
Yeah.
But like, I'll give you an example. So I had a climb in Russia. Thank God I got that done before all this stuff in Russia happened.
No kidding.
Right? So I'm in Russia of 2021, September, and I get there and all my luggage is lost.
Oh.
Okay. So, and Russia is a technical climb. So you needed like boots that really fit and certain ice crampons and all these different things, because it's a lot more technical than Everest or some of the other climbs. And so I'm there and I'm like, oh my God. They're like, okay, well, the weather window's now. So we either go now or we don't climb. And we can take you to a store to rent gear. And I said, okay, well, let's go do that. But at the time I'm thinking, I'm just going to go home. Like, this is ridiculous. They lost all my stuff. This is a technical climb. The guides barely speak any English. Like, there's so much going against me. Right.
Yeah.
And somehow I was able to stop and say, okay, however far I get on this mountain is going to be knowledge that I can use the next time I come back. So like, I changed my objective. Instead of summiting, now my goal was just to learn as much as I can so it's easier the next time I come. Okay. Yeah. And in that shifting, it allowed me to like not be grumpy the entire time I was there. And then also like made me pay attention to the details. I'm like, oh, okay, like this is what I'd bring, or this is what I do, or blah, 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 blah. And we ended up summiting.
Wow.
Right. Which was just a miracle. And like, of course, some not excellent things happened on the trip or whatever. But at the end of the day, we summited. And I pull back on that all the time, because when things get hard or they're not perfect or they're not lining up the way that I envisioned them to, I just have to remember like, well, we're still gaining. Whatever we're still learning. There's still things to be taken in or to be experienced. So whatever it is, it is. Stop worrying about the destination. Just understand that this is part of it, and I'm going to get something out of it that I need. And that Russian example is something I fall back on a ton, because I just allowed myself to not summit, see what happens, and we ended up summiting.
Yeah, right. And so you got the goal, but you also got so much more.
Yeah.
Because you, like, the analogy I've always used is like, when I have expectations, I'm focused on like XYZ thing. And if that's not happening, I'm disappointed or frustrated or whatever negative emotion tends to come from not met expectations. But when I can when I can let go of that expectation, the whole alphabet becomes available to me to receive. And like, that's just a much more rich place to be, but it takes a really intentional decision to let it go. Right. And it sounds like that's exactly like what you experienced. You got the expectation, but you got all of the rest of the good that was actually there the whole time. You just couldn't see it before you let go of that.
Couldn't see it, couldn't experience, couldn't embody it, couldn't do any of that. Right. And so it just shifted so much. And that's the thing, like, we just need like one little teeny tiny story in these different circumstances to have on speed dial that we can use to help us navigate whatever comes our way.
Yeah. Just kind of bottle it up and goes in your pack every single time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd actually be cool to like actually write it in a little piece of paper and like physically pack this like encouragement and inspiration with you to remind you. Like, I'm probably going to think through mine and I might do that. So for you, Jenn, the question I like to ask people to kind of wrap these conversations up is, because, you know, we go through hard seasons and you've shared a hard story, but we're always going through these difficult moments, and some seasons are longer than others. But if we're growing, there should be something challenging and pushing us. And so what is something hard that you're in the middle of, like, right now?
I am in the middle of, like, transitions are hard, I think, right? So we're just starting school this week, and I have a 10th grader now, right? Wow. I have a 9th grader. I have 4 schools this year. And like, now that we're getting into this new season of fall, making sure that I'm spending time where I want to spend it. What my intentions are actually followed through by what my actions are. I sometimes can give lip service to the ideas in my head and not really follow through. So it's just right now, it's like just making smart choices and making sure like, okay, I have 7 kids. Am I getting a private time with each one of them each week? Am I doing the things that I want to do? Am I showing up how I want to show up? And when we go through these transitions, it kind of shifts everything, and it just gets a little wobbly for a couple weeks. And I have to just remind myself like, oh, this is the season of wobbles. We'll start studying out in a couple weeks. It's fine. And be patient with myself, because if I'm patient with myself and know that it's going to come through, by living that, I'm an example for my children to do the same thing.
Totally. Season of wobbles.
Yeah.
I like that. We just had a kid 6 weeks ago, and it's totally a season of wobbles. Yes. And I'll share it with my wife. I'm sure that'll encourage her. It's like, this is a wobbly season.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's going well. So Jenn, for people who maybe were really encouraged by the story that you shared, or just the wisdom that you offered during our conversation, how can people keep up with you, learn more about you, and the things that you're doing, this mission you're on to climb these mountains?
I love it. I love the support. I love little messages. So thank you. I have an Instagram handle called breakproof.jen. My website is jenndrummond.com, and that's 2 N's in Jen. So JENNDRUMMOND. Okay. And then that has links to all the other social stuff that we do.
Okay. Yeah, so that's their base camp, to use your mountains analogy, jenndrummond.com. And then they can, but you were telling me before we even got on air that you've got a podcast as well.
I do. I have a podcast called Take a Break with Jenn. So where we like just look at how people have navigated to their position in life through breaks that are intentional or sometimes unintentional.
Yeah. Love it. I'm going to be listening. Well, Jenn, thanks for spending some time with me and with our audience and sharing your story. I'm confident it'll be an encouragement for a lot of people.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope you have a good day.